Hi everyone, welcome to the April 14th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, looking ahead to Saturday's card at Keeneland. Plenty of stakes on tap. There are three actually that are part of the late pick 5 sequence, which comprises races 7 through 11. The feature race is the G1 Jenny Wiley on the turf. We'll get to that a little bit later in the sequence. That goes as race 10 on this 11 race card, though a lot of eyes will also be trained on race 9, which is the Grade 3 Lexington. This is the final Kentucky Derby prep race that offers qualifying points to get into the Kentucky Derby starting gate. And Craig, I know a lot of people are interested to see how Disarm does in this race because he's the only one that's on the bubble that can really use this Lexington to potentially vault into that Kentucky Derby field.
Yeah, it's kind of going to sound a little silly, but I was going to ask you because I don't pay that much attention to this stuff. I figure when the PPs are drawn, then I'll see who's in the Derby. But just glancing, it didn't look like any of them were horses who were close. So good to know there's one. We'll get to how we feel about that horse when we get to the race. Doubt he'd be a factor in the Derby regardless of what he does on Saturday, but good to know there is one that's trying. I actually suspected more with the contentiousness of the points this year.
Yeah, I think it's just the way that it worked out. A lot of the horses that are on the bubble just ran last week or 2 weeks ago, so it's kind of tough to wheel back on such short rest in the Lexington. I think Disarm is coming off a 3-week layoff, having last run in the Louisiana Derby. But as Craig said, we'll get to that when we bring up the Lexington as the middle leg of this pick 5 sequence. Like I said, 3 stakes on tap: the Giants Causeway, Lexington, and Jenny Wiley. The sequence is bookended by a pair of allowance races on the dirt, and that's where we'll begin. Race 7, it is an N1X allowance event going the mile and a 16th distance with the short stretch run at Keeneland. A field of 8 signed on here, and Craig, this is a tough way to start the sequence because there are some multiple short prices on the morning line. I would say that they all have different questions to answer. Included among them would be the number 1 Barber Road, who I believe is the 5-2 morning line favorite. And this horse certainly has class. He's got recent speed figures that put him in the mix, but it's been a while since Barber Road has won a race, and he's been stuck at this level for a little while now since coming back to launch his 4-year-old campaign, and just not sure I want to take another short price on him.
Yeah, this is a very difficult sequence as we're going to get into as we go through this races, and it starts right out in the first leg. The 8-horse field, off the top of my head, it may be the shortest field we're going to look at. If not, it's one of them. And Barber Road, I'm kind of with you. I guess the one encouraging sign for Barber Road would be that he seemed to change tactics last time, and he did it without an equipment change. It was just a rider change. He had been a horse who just would drop to the back, near the back of his races, and try to make one run. He was that horse that was actually on the Derby trail and ran in the Kentucky Derby, was only beaten 4 lengths in the Rich Strike Derby, but doesn't seem to be able to get over that hurdle. But if you had to point to one thing for him, I think it is that he improved his speed figure in TimeformUS back up to a 112. Still not quite to his best races as a 3-year-old, but at least he did show speed from that inside post.
Yeah, I think the rider switch back to Raylu Gutierrez last time, who of course did ride him in the Kentucky Derby, made the difference because you could see coming out of the starting gate, Raylu had real intentions to get this horse more forward than he had been in some prior starts. Actually made a couple of middle moves during the race, one into the clubhouse turn and then another down the backstretch when he actually moved up from 3rd place into the lead. And I think those early moves, arguably premature moves, he might have paid the price for them at the very end when he got run down by Icarus. He might have to do a little better to beat this field, but not that much better. I just wasn't sure how short a price I wanted to take on him because he's not the naturally fastest horse, and I think there are some others in here that will be more forwardly placed than he is, even if they want to be forward with Barber Road in this spot. And I think that brings us, Craig, to a horse that I expect to take more money than he's shown as taking on the morning line. That's the number 4, Principe Doro, going out for Juddmonte and Todd Pletcher. This is a horse that's been short prices in every start so far in his career, so I don't think we're going to get that 6-1, but I would say this horse is a legitimate contender in the race because his return last time at Gulfstream, I thought, was pretty positive. The pace was honest. He hung around for 3rd, and just given the fact that there don't appear to be too many other confirmed frontrunners in this race, even though there are other runners with tactical speed, I do expect him to get sent to the front, and he could be tough to pass.
Yeah, the pace projector shows him on a clear, easy lead, and when you look through the PPs, it's kind of easy to say why. I think he's naturally the fastest horse in this field, and I wanted to like him when I started, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I because of that early lead advantage, I pulled up some stats on Formulator, and Todd Pletcher, when he brings a horse like this off a layoff, I'm talking about males who are old 4-year-olds and up. I really like to differentiate between age because I think 2 and 3-year-olds are handled a little bit different off of layoffs. He's only 2 for 25 in that situation with a 0.30 ROI. I used a similar layoff to this from 300 days to a year. Most trainers you wouldn't be able to find a good sample. With Todd Pletcher having so many horses he does, second start off the layoff, he improves that to 29 cents, 29%. The ROI is still in negative territory, but it's Todd Pletcher. You're not going to get a lot of big prices from him. So I just think it's pretty clear that that horse wasn't fully cranked first time out, and I expect a much better effort on Saturday.
Yeah, and I'll point out that the horse that was second to him last time, actually one spot ahead of him, Giant Game, did come back in another allowance race and improved his TimeformUS speed figure to a 112, just missing again, finishing second. So I think there's some legitimacy to that 106 that he got last time. And I know he won his maiden in a race that was a little difficult to make a speed figure for. I think I remember us talking about this race at the time. It gets the B designation in TimeformUS for a breakout. But some horses who finished behind Principe Doro that day have come back to do some nice things, including the runner-up Montauk Point. So I think that number looks fairly legit in retrospect. And to me, Principe Doro just looks like a logical contender in this race. Like I said, the only drawback is I think he's going to be closer to 3-1 than 6-1. Greg, anywhere else that you were looking at in this race, other places to go? There are some horses that are drawn towards the outside that I do want to ask you about who've got some big speed figures in their past performances, including the number 8 Master Game, who earned a TimeformUS speed figure 2 back that absolutely towers over this field. I have some questions, as I assume you do as well, though, about the legitimacy of that number and whether he can repeat it.
Yes, I actually have that exact thing in my notes for that horse. I don't like this horse in that spot, and part of it's that speed figure. It's one I probably am going to go back and change. I gave it a good look last night. It's one my assistant made, and I'm not putting blame on him. I review all the figures, and I agreed with him at the time. It was a race that was run at a different distance at all the other routes, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't fit with the others. And I think it's one I'm going to go back and adjust to the more normal figures. A lot of horses have come from that race and not run very well, so it's just one I think needs to be downgraded. I usually don't like to do that, especially this late in the game. It's been 3 months now. But there just wasn't a whole lot of evidence one way or the other. Horses just don't run back as they used to as often. So I think the horse is in a tough spot. And just looking at the rest of his running lines, I just don't have a lot of interest in him. Couple others that maybe I just wanted to mention. The 5-horse husband material. I think if you were looking for a big price play in this race, he could be one. He's been on turf the last couple times. His figures, particularly his last race, really jumped up. But I think that may have something to do with the first time gelding more so than the surface switch. This horse has run fine on dirt in the past. He broke his maiden on a wet track on the dirt. So I don't want to just totally write the change in the seeming improvement, even though he hasn't finished all that well in his races. His speed figures are better, particularly that last one. And maybe it's more from the gelding than it is from the surface switch.
Craig, you landed on my crazy horse that I wanted to talk about, and you stole my thunder a little bit. It's okay; it happens sometimes. I also think husband material is interesting in this race because, I mean, just to kind of expand upon it, all of his dirt races were as a 2-year-old back in 2021. So of course he was running lower speed figures back then, and I mean he showed that he handled a route distance on the dirt when he broke his maiden, albeit against 2 rivals at Delaware, but clearly handled the dirt that day. And I also want to point out that Rocky Run Stakes that he ran in as a 2-year-old, his final start as a 2-year-old, that field has turned out to be okay. The winner, Cook Creek, did some decent things. The runner-up from that race, Affable Monarch, he has since significantly improved his speed figures, and if he were entered in this race, we'd be talking about him as a contender. So Husband Material just feels like one that might have more upside than it appears on paper, and I also think he ran deceptively well in that most recent turf start at Gulfstream. Slow pace, just completely held together up front, and he was really running at the end. It doesn't necessarily look that way from the running line, but when you watch the replay, he was absolutely flying across the finish line, and he's really bred to be more of a dirt horse by American Pharoah. He's a half-brother to a horse named Uncle Lino, who placed in Derby preps when he was on the Derby Trail a number of years ago. That the second dam is Oatsy, who's the family of Lady Joni and Shackelford. I mean, there's really strong dirt route pedigree here, and I feel like this is a horse that's going to appreciate getting back on the main track, and he figures to be a big price in this race. So I agree. I'm going to give an extra little push to him, Craig, even though you already brought him up at a price. Brendan Walsh has a couple of runners in here. I can't get too excited about Crump, who just kind of feels like Barbara Road Jr., even though he never really made it to races like the Kentucky Derby. He's just won for a double-digit number of starts and feels like content to settle for minor awards. Tepeu's a little more interesting coming off the layoff, Craig, because Brendan Walsh does have pretty solid numbers with horses off layoffs in a variety of situations, and this horse ran some decent speed figures at Churchill Downs last year, so I'm not going to be surprised when he's able to take a step forward from his 3-year-old to 4-year-old season.
Yeah, and it would appear he's a first-time gelding. I would assume it happened during this layoff. I think this is one of those cases where it's pretty safe to say. I doubt it happened before his last start and then he laid off. Like you said, Brendan Walsh, he's fine off of layoffs, not a blow you away kind of stat, but he wins at about the same percent he wins races, so he can get a horse ready. I would definitely prefer him of the two Brendan Walsh horses. The only other one I guess I would mention, and he's just a total wild card for me, is the 2 Graphic Deal. I don't like that his odds are just 4-1, but he's a horse who's been in good form on the Turfway Park synthetic surface. He's shown some ability on the dirt, so for me, this is just a really tough race. In the end, I'll probably wind up leaning on the 4 Principe d'Oro. Use Husband Material as more like a B, and then use some of the others we talked about C's, if I even wind up playing this sequence, because a lot of these races are, frankly, just very difficult.
Yeah, let's touch upon that at the end, whether or not we're going to play this sequence. But I agree, it's one that is not the easiest to put a ticket together for. And before we move on, just to touch upon that horse, you brought up Graphic Detail. I'll say I think you're going to get a lot better than 4-1 if you like him. I just don't like him that much. I don't think he wants to go this far. I'm not sure that he's quite as good on the dirt.
Yeah, and to that point, I know I saw several morning lines in here. We've already talked about a couple of them that we were a little iffy on, and I know you and I were both friends with Nick Tamaro. I'm not trying to pick on Nick. This is an extremely difficult job at Keeneland to try to come up with these morning lines. Horses are shipping in from all over, lots of surface changes, so many good trainers. It's just a very difficult job, and in the end, Nick may very wind up being right, but we want to talk about these horses from a value perspective, and it's hard to do that if we don't give our opinions.
I completely agree. It's not an enviable job, as I know well, and there are a couple lines today where I completely agree with Nick, so we'll get to those in a little bit. Let's move on to the next race in this sequence, the Giants Causeway, and just for those that want an expanded view of this race, I'll point out that Craig and I did film a stakes preview of this race that you can check out on Daily Racing Form's YouTube channel, where we talk about more contenders than we'll probably get to right now. But, Craig, this is a wide open affair. We mentioned it when we recorded the other day. Hard to know exactly who's going to go favorite in here. Wesley Ward has a couple of runners that could take money. I think, though, you and I both agreed that despite a poor post position, the horse to beat just on form and ability is the number 12 Star Divine.
Yeah, I believe so as well. The post is the tough spot, but she's run the best speed figures. I would say she's been the most consistent. She wins her fair share of races. She's won 3 out of 10 in her career. She's always there. She's a horse who's probably in the best form. It's just a matter of if you think she can work out a trip from that outside post.
Yeah, she is coming off a layoff, and as you said, she was in great form when she was running at the end of last year. She is a horse that has gotten some pretty good trips along the way to earn her speed figures, which do make her one of the fastest horses in here. And Jorge Abreu, not a trainer that has the best numbers off layoffs. He does okay with that move, so we'll see if she's able to work out this trip from the outside post position. If she is that morning line of 6-1, I think that's fair value on her. But it's a wide open race where I think you want to keep an open mind with regard to other contenders potentially at better prices. Craig, what do you make of those two Wesley Ward trainees? Because I think they both could take money in here, Happy Soul and Twilight Gleaming, and one of the complicating factors towards handicapping this race is determining how the pace is going to shake out, because both of these Ward runners have early speed.
Wesley Ward's never been afraid to scratch a horse. I think it should be mentioned. So let's not assume that both of these are going to run. I just think it's one where handicappers are going to have to check the entries in the morning and check the changes and see if they're both running, because if they are, it's going to create quite the dilemma, because I can't imagine the instructions would be for them to go out and both try to make the lead. Maybe Happy Soul would be the one told to go to the front with Twilight Gleaming having the outside post. But Twilight Gleaming's a filly who's never in her life not gone to the lead. So that would seem a little bit interesting, at least on turf. I think maybe in her 4.5 furlong race, she came a little bit off the pace. But she's naturally fast. I'm not sure she wants to go this far. I'm not sure she's really developed very much as she's gotten older. And since that Breeders' Cup win, she... even though she won a few races, her speed figures didn't really approve at the rate you'd like to see. So for me, I'm not a big fan of either one of these Wesley Ward fillies, even if only one of them goes, honestly.
Yeah, we pretty much agree on both of them. I just don't see either one offering fair value in this race, especially Twilight Gleaming, who I agree with what you said. I don't think she's really moved forward, and I have questions about her getting the 5.5 furlong distance. To me, she's a pure 5 furlong turf sprinter, and that extra half furlong has really proved key in her last few races when she's tried it. She's just kind of shut down at the very end, so I worry about that here, especially with some other pace signed on. Craig, let's talk about the horses that we do like. I know there was one that is probably going to be a big price that you had your eye on.
Yeah, I kind of had my eye on Miner's Queen, the 9 horse. She's 15-1 on the morning line. I'm sure she's going to be every bit of that. She was a filly who 3 starts back won an allowance race with a nice speed figure at Keeneland. She had a good trip that day, no doubt about it. But the reason I lean to her, I think she's going to offer value. I expect her to run well. Is I just think both of her last couple races you can kind of ignore. 2 back, she ran in a stakes at Turfway Park, battled for the lead early, dropped back, but that was on the synthetic surface, obviously. And last time at the fairgrounds in the Mardi Gras Stakes, she ran into Ouvra, another horse who's in this race. But I'm just prone to give horses that ran on that fairgrounds turf course, one we talked about many times as we on our pace cast, and we handicapped a couple cards from there. It was just not a very good condition turf course. Some horses handled it, some did not. I don't think she got a great trip that day. I don't think she was enjoying the footing when I watched the replay, and it's just one I want to give a shot at a price in a race that I'm definitely going to lean towards price horses. If I'm going to play the pick 5, this is a race where I'll use a few horses, but none of them are going to be the favorites.
Yeah, for me, she's a bit of a one-number horse, that race 3 back that you pointed out, but it was over Keeneland's course, and as you say, if she repeats that number, it does make her a competitor in here, or a contender, I should say. So I'm definitely not going to talk anybody off a horse that's going to be 15-1 or potentially upwards of that. Craig, I am interested in that other horse that you mentioned who did defeat Miner's Queen last time, the number 4 Ouvra, and I mean, she's just a horse that loves to win races. I sometimes take a skeptical view of these types because when they win so often, they kind of develop or gain this air of invincibility, and they tend to go off at underlays consistently, and maybe she'll fall into that category here, but this race is so wide open, and it's at a higher class than she's been competing, so I'm not anticipating that she's going to be some kind of very short price in this race, and she just continues to run competitive efforts, especially if you isolate her turf races. And I do think that despite doing a lot of winning on the dirt, she is slightly better on the turf, or at least I prefer her turf races a little bit, and she's the kind of horse that has the versatility to make her own good trips.
He does, and her. I agree with you about the surfaces. Her speed figures are clearly better on the turf than they are on dirt. So I've got no knocks on her. She's certainly a contender in here. Maybe some people might question that her last two wins came at the fairgrounds, but as you pointed out, she's won all over the place. She won at Colonial, she won at Hawthorne on the turf. She's been able to move the dirt and win, so she doesn't carry her racetrack with her. She can run with it. She doesn't need to carry her racetrack with her. She can run just wherever. So she's certainly a horse that I think fits in well here. And I'm not going to hold that fairgrounds against her because of it. And her speed figures are right there with the others. Maybe needs a slight step forward, but I think that's possible if she's as good as we think she might be with the increase in competition.
Craig, I know you had some interest in Amy C., the Phil D'Amato horse who ships in from Southern California. I think we really have to just wait and see if she can go this short, because while she has appreciated turning back to sprint distances on the turf in Southern California, all of those have been 6.5 races down the hill. And I know something that you harp on quite a bit is that those 6.5 races can sometimes play more to the miler types than they do to the true 5.5 furlong turf sprinters. So for me, it kind of remains to be seen which of those categories she really fits into.
Yeah, I think it's a question for sure, and she's looked good. The one thing that tends to make me want to use her, where I would normally be against her, is how easily she's won those races, and she's done it against some pretty good fillies out in California who have been very good turf sprinters the last couple seasons. So I'm giving her a little bit of benefit of the doubt. I worry a little bit that she doesn't quite have that speed that we see from some of the 5.5 furlong sprinters, and maybe she'd need to get shuffled back further than she's used to and come with one late run. But as of now, at least, there's a decent amount of speed, so I wouldn't want to totally dismiss her. I know you have some stats for Phil D'Amato that you want to bring up that would kind of point against her, but I don't want to totally dismiss her just based on how easily she's winning those races and with pretty good speed figures.
Yeah, Phil D'Amato is just a trainer that has a ton of success in Southern California. I know, Craig, one of your favorite trainers to bet in turf races in Southern California. That success does not always transfer to other circuits. When you look up his stats in Formulator, much stronger numbers in California than elsewhere. I specifically looked up his record in Kentucky over the past 5 years. In a 142 starter sample, his ROI is 88 cents on a $2 bet. So definitely has not had that kind of success outside of the state of California. And some of those numbers were compiled during that pandemic year when you saw a lot of trainers shipping around the country just to find places to run. But still, it's just a pattern that you see in general with Phil D'Amato. One more horse that I do want to mention, Craig, and the one that I was most interested in this race is the number 11 Little Jewel. Like with Star Divine, I don't love the post position, but I do think that this horse is really heading in the right direction. I was quite taken with her maiden victory 2-back when she won by over 4 lengths, going that 5 furlong distance at Gulfstream. I mean, you don't often see large margins of victory like that over that configuration in the Gulfstream Park turf course, and she was really going away at the end of that race and galloped out so strongly. She came back in a stakes last time, not as tough a stakes as this one, but I still thought that she showed some likable attributes, coming through on the inside, squeezing up the rail to win that race, going away at the end once again, and she continued to gallop out well. Just feels like a horse in just the 5th start of her career that still has upside. She's bred to be a good one for these connections. She's the younger half-sister to Little Mike, who won the Breeders' Cup Turf for the same owner team. So I just think Little Jewel is a horse that can take a step forward. She's going to need to on speed figures, but I like this horse.
Yeah, you kind of sold me on her. I know we showed the replay on our preview of this race. The horse who ran second, trained Artemis, drew the rail in here. I there's under no circumstances, even given the post, would I ever take train to Artemis over Little Jewel. After watching that race and at the price they're going to be, I have no problem with using Little Jewel. Like I said, I'm going to try to spread a little bit in here, and she would definitely be one that I'd use. I remember when we put up our selections, I don't think we had any of the same horses in our top 4. It was just it's that kind of race, and it's one where I probably would use even more than what I listed, and Little C would be one of them.
Let's move on to the middle leg of this sequence. It is that Derby prep, the Grade 3 Lexington, going the mile and a 16th distance on the dirt course. Pretty interesting field signed on here, Craig. A lot of lightly raced runners with some significant potential. 11 horses signed on, and I think we're going to have a lot of the wagering concentrated with 2 horses in particular. The number 5, First Mission, going out for the Brad Cox stable, and then also the number 6, Disarm, who is the one that is seeking those Kentucky Derby qualifying points. I believe he needs a top 3 finish to get enough points to work his way into the top 20 for the Kentucky Derby. So I think those 2 are going to vie for favoritism, kind of like the morning line suggests. I just didn't think that either one necessarily had such an advantage over this field that I wanted to take such a short price on anybody.
Yeah, I look at it a little different. I really think First Mission's a very, very good horse. So of the 2, I much prefer him. Now he is the morning line favorite, so it's not any great opinion that's going to get you rich. But I think his 2 races are a little bit better than what they look. He lost first out to a very talented horse, Bishop's Bay, a horse who has since come back to win. His speed figure wasn't as good, but that was 100% a pace situation, in my opinion. It's a stablemate as well. And it came back a really fast race, and everything about that race has proven to be legit. From the winner coming back to win, all the horses in behind have seemingly run improved races, speed figure wise. So for me, of the 2, I think First Mission is much the horse to beat. Disarm, I mean, he ran fine in that Louisiana Derby. It wasn't a particularly fast race. It was a race with a very slow pace. We noted that on the pace cast. So maybe you could give an excuse for that pace figure because of the pace figures. He's run into that situation twice now. But it's not like he was a million lengths behind in those races either. He was just kind of 3, 4 lengths back at most. Finishes off his races okay, but he should be finishing them because there hasn't been much of a pace. And I just have a feeling he's going to get overbet off that second place Louisiana Derby finish.
Yeah, I see that as well. He just feels like a horse that a lot of people are going to be focused on in this race. And just based on his speed figures and form, I'm not sure that he has to win. I'm not sure that this race isn't tougher than the Louisiana Derby that he was second in last time. So I just feel like this is not a guaranteed victory for Disarm by any stretch. And don't get me wrong, Craig, if I had to identify the most likely winner of this race, I would agree it's First Mission. It's just, and I wrote about this in a column that I started on DRF.com this week, where I talk about fair odds in an expanded form in a race, and this week I chose the Lexington, and I put something out on Twitter with my entire fair odds grid and how I expect the betting to go, and I try to capture the fact that I do think First Mission is the most likely winner, but it's the kind of race where I don't really want to take a price lower than about 7-2 on anybody, just given the amount of ability that's in this race. So I don't expect to get the value on First Mission, but he's a horse that in a sequence like this, I'm definitely using because I think he is the one to beat. And I agreed with your notes about him. His last win was very impressive, and I do think that speed figure was legitimate. But that kind of brings me to the other Brad Cox horse in this race, the number 3, Demolition Duke. And, Craig, you brought up Bishop's Bay coming back in that allowance race that was run at an extremely slow pace. And Bishop's Bay had some of his own trouble in there because there was a bit of an incident heading into the clubhouse turn where he minorly clipped heels and had to recover from that. But he still was sitting on top of a slow pace that mostly held together. And, I think we've got to give Demolition Duke some credit for being the only horse that was making up ground into some extremely fast closing splits. I mean, you don't often see TimeformUS pace figure lines like the one that he's coming out of on the dirt, where he goes from pace figures in the 50s all the way up to a 98 at the very end. And that was a race that justifiably got a big pace upgrade. I just think Demolition Duke has finished very powerfully in both starts so far. There's supposed to be some pace in this race for him to close into, and I don't know if he has the raw ability of a horse like First Mission, but I know that he's going to be running at the end, and I think the price is going to be significantly better.
He would be the second horse for me. I prefer him to Disarm. For all the reasons you mentioned, I mean, that pace upgrade that I gave that race was pretty mild. And it was not because of the top two horses, it was because of those in behind. I didn't want to overrate the rest of the field, and that's a problem with the adjustments is we don't do it by individual horse, and we really can. I mean, I think it would be too tough. So I think both Bishop's Bay and Demolition Duke could have run much better figures with a more reasonable pace. So I think for me at least, he is the second horse in here, and that's just because I think he's going to run well for one. And the other reason is I'm just not as sold on all the other horses who are going to take money. We've already talked a little bit about this arm. Some others on the morning line who are short prices. Arabian Lion, the 11 horse who uh, ran a nice race at Keeneland last year on Breeders' Cup. I think it was on Breeders' Cup Saturday, if I remember, when he lost to Giant Mischief. Had some nice speed figures, has really regressed since and just hasn't looked like the same horse. I'm always very leery of these horses, particularly since he's going long still. If he was turning back, maybe I'd have a different outlook on him. But it just seems like this horse is being an afterthought in the Bob Baffert barn. He's still with Bob Baffert because obviously there's no Derby aspirations here. But from the 11 post especially, just not a horse I would use at all in here. And the other one likely to take money is Empire Strikes Fast, coming out for Bill Mott, second time. Impressive win first time out at Gulfstream. Surprised everyone. He was 23 to 1 that day, ran a big speed figure of 113. But that was only a month ago. This is a pretty big jump up in class. It's just not the kind of horse I'm ever going to take in situations like this where he doesn't have a speed figure edge and certainly lacks a lot of experience to some others.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about both of those horses. Arabian Lion is the kind of horse that it feels like there's this disconnect between the speed figures that he's gotten and sort of the general feeling that he's been disappointing in spite of those high speed figures, because just based purely on the numbers, Craig, you could make the case that he's a major player in this race. But when I go back and watch his last three races, I just didn't like any of those performances. I mean, even the race at Keeneland when he got beat by Giant Mischief, he was not supposed to lose that race. I know Giant Mischief has turned out to be a good horse, or at least seems like he's going to turn out to be a good one-turn horse. But Arabian Lion, I mean, there was so much hype around him, and he just got turned away by that rival. And then his two races going longer, they just say to me, this horse wants no part of two turns, and it's strange to me that they're sticking with it and running in another mile and a 16th graded stakes race when it's so obvious that this horse wants to go shorter distances. So it's just a little bit counterintuitive. I know he's been training well into this race. He's a horse that always seems to train well. I just have doubts about him, translating that form to the afternoon. He just feels like a little bit of a morning glory that wants to go shorter. And I've made this point before. The progeny of Justify that we've seen so far, they generally do not want to go long. And if you look up the stats, it kind of just, it smacks you in the face. I mean, he has a percentage that's around 6 or 7% with his dirt routers so far. And Arabian Lion, he's coming out of a race via Robert B. Lewis where it got a big speed figure from everybody, from Beyer, from you. I have some doubts about the quality of that field in retrospect. Only two horses have come back, obviously with the winner going to the sidelines, but hard to figure. Completely blew up at Sunland Park. Worcester was a non-factor in the UAE Derby. It just feels like maybe that wasn't the toughest field, and he finished last. So he's not for me. And as for Empire Strikes Fast, yes, he beat a nice horse on debut in Dreamlike, who came back to finish third in the Wood Memorial, and he earned a strong speed figure, but it's asking a lot of this horse to step up to this level of competition in just the second start of his career. Bill Mott does not have strong numbers with this move. Last out debut winners, second-time starters on dirt over the past 5 years. He's just 2 for 28 with a $1.03 ROI. So I have some questions about Empire Strikes Fast being ready for this challenge right now, even though I think he could be a talented horse for later.
And I did want to mention that Arabian Lion race. That was essentially that Bob Baffert intramural race where all 5 starters were his, or all 4 starters. And Arabian Lion came in last in that race. And as you said, the form hasn't been flattered. Hard to figure, was shipped to New Mexico and ran terribly. So, yeah, the speed figure fits. There's no reason to go back and change it. It's perfectly fine on the day, but I just wonder how much competing was really going on in that race as opposed to just 4 horses running around getting some exercise.
And I'll say, I do think that this race is going to be won by one of the logical horses. I really think there's a lot of strength among the horses that are going to take money in this race, maybe excluding Arabian Lion. But I just want to mention a couple of others at huge prices, Craig. Not so much for the pick five, maybe horses to use underneath them like a trifecta. Dennington, I have some doubts about the speed figure two back. We've talked about that already. But I will say, his Louisiana Derby is not as bad as it looks because that pace really did not work for a closer, and he was wide every step of the way. So I feel like his true ability is somewhere between that allowance win two back and the Louisiana Derby. He's better than the last performance. Still feel like a win is going to be slightly out of reach for him, but I won't be surprised when he's picking up the pieces. And just a horse that I want to keep an eye on for later is the number 2 Reinvest. I really like both of his races at Tampa. I feel like he's a better horse than those speed figures indicate. When you watch the replays, there's something there. There's like a frame of a really good horse. I just feel like this might be too much too soon for him, but he's one that I kind of want to put in my stable mail and see where he goes eventually.
Yeah, interesting. I will do just that. But I'm with you. I wouldn't use either one of those in the win end. I totally get where you're coming from with Dennington. I expect him to run better. But even his best race, even if you believe that speed figure in the allowance race, and it still probably wouldn't be good enough to win here.
Let's move on to the grade 1 portion of this sequence. Race 10, it is the Jenny Wiley going the mile and the 16th distance on the turf course for fillies and mares. And Craig, this is a race that Chad Brown typically points a lot of his best female turf horses to, and he certainly seems to have done that this year as he has entered a pair of runners, of course topped by the morning line favorite, the number 2 in Italian. And I mean, there are no two ways about it. She is just the horse to beat in this race, coming off her runner-up finish in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, where she was the top American finisher, only beaten by the Aidan O'Brien trained Tuesday. And she ran a really nice race that day, 129 TimeformUS speed figure. It's not like it's the first time that she's run a number in that upper stratosphere. So, I mean, she's one that I think is a legitimate favorite, and we can debate how deeply we want to go in this race to use other horses, but I'm not leaving her off my tickets.
No, I'm not either. And it's a race where there's some name value. We're obviously going to talk about some others in here. I think she is very clearly the horse to beat. Her Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf was obviously an excellent race. I'm not even sure that's a distance she really wants to go, and she was still able to hang on for second despite setting a really fast pace. This race should just be perfect for her. Chad Brown, we know, does just fine off the layoff, so she would be an A horse for me. I guess I'll start with other horses that I would use. We don't need to go on with her merits. They're pretty obvious. I think I even voted for her for the Eclipse Award, if memory serves. Queen Goddess, I think, for me, is the one other horse that I would use pretty strongly. Not as strong as in Italian. It might be an A-B situation. Just because she is in really good form right now. She ran her career best speed figure in the Pegasus Filly and Mare Turf, a race we actually downgraded because of pace, and it was a quick pace, one she was close to. She beat that field really easily, so she's the one horse I don't want to totally dismiss in here, because if In Italian isn't fully cranked at 100%, I think she would be the one most likely to pick up the pieces. I know some others might disagree as we discuss a few other horses in here, but I just can't get past how good a form she's in, and I know we both liked her that day in the Pegasus, and she's proven that she was really good despite running out in what is often considered the weaker West Coast division, but she's just in top form.
Yeah, Craig, I get the sense we're pretty much going to be on the same page here. And I think what makes these two look even stronger is that there really isn't that much speed signed on in this race. Obviously, In Italian's expected to be the front runner, as she usually is. I guess the number 8, Freedom Speaks, a bit of a wild card, a horse that's done her turf racing over shorter distances. We'll see if her jockey or connections decide to get really aggressive and try to mess things up for the favorite. I guess that's a possibility. But, I mean, Queen Goddess just figures to be sitting in that perfect spot, stalking in third. It's really In Italian. Queen Goddess is the stalker, and then a bunch of closers in this race. So I feel like both of these horses are going to work out good trips, arguably Queen Goddess a better trip. And she's the other one that I want to use. Do I think that she's quite as good as In Italian right now? Probably not. I think that you made the right call downgrading that speed figure for the Pegasus World Cup filly and mare turf a little bit, because the higher number just wouldn't really make sense for a lot of other horses in that race. So I don't want to upgrade her anymore just based on the final time figure. I think she's that expresses where she is right now, and we'll see if she can take another step forward. I think she's going to need to beat in Italian, but I agree, she's the other one that I would want to use, because I'm not quite as thrilled with the other horse that I think is going to take money in this race, the number 5 With the Moonlight. She's fine. She ran some good races here as a 3-year-old last year, and I know these Charlie Appleby horses have a way of coming over to the U.S. and just outrunning their PPs from overseas, but she is going to be facing tougher horses than she was in Dubai over the winter.
Exactly, and the Charlie Appleby tour seems to be starting earlier this year. We're recording this on Friday. He has Modern Games entered in the Maker's Mark Mile. I think that's what it's still called. If not, it's the mile race on Friday. I much more fancy that horse than I do With the Moonlight. She doesn't have time form ratings in our PPs right now from her two Dubai races. I think they'll show up for Saturday. I'm not an expert on how that all works, but I went and looked them up today. Her last two races were 115 and 116 on the time form scale. I tend to trust those for 4-year-olds, fillies. So to me, she's just kind of the same horse we saw last year. If those ratings were in the 120s, maybe I'd give a different look. Timeform saying she matured, she's a better horse. But those were pretty minor races in Dubai, and she didn't try on the big day some of the better races she could have run in. So I'm a little skeptical of her. She's going to get overbet. I think that's a certainty with Charlie Appleby and just how well his horses do here. But this is one of the few that I'm not so high on.
The one other horse in this race, Craig, that I was trying to make a case for, and I feel like I just couldn't quite get there, and I'm trying to, tamp down my bias towards this horse because I've been a fan of hers for a long time, and that's the number 9, White Frost, who you knew I could not go without mentioning. I thought she ran very well last time when she was second off the layoff, closing into that moderate pace that was set by the winner, Faith in Humanity. I know we talked about this race on the Pacecast after it was run, that we kind of both felt like White Frost might have run the better race that day, even though Faith in Humanity won and was a very bettable price, and I know you were pleased about that result. White Frost was really charging hard at the end, and I think having to wait for room on the turn and going wide, it ultimately prevented her from winning that race. I just can't quite convince myself that she's this good right now. I think that she's shown great potential to be a nice turf horse for her entire career. She's had sort of trouble building up momentum due to some long layoffs that she's had to endure, but I just don't know if she's quite grade 1 quality right now.
Exactly. That was a grade 3 to Honey Fox at Gulfstream. I think after watching that race, I said if her and Facing Humanity were to hook up at Keeneland, I would take White Frost every time. But they're not hooking up because she's taken a big jump up in class. I'm with you. I think she's a really good mare on the turf, just not quite this good to handle horses like an Italian and Queen Goddess.
Move on to the last leg of this sequence. It is another allowance event like we opened with, this one going in the 6.5 furlong distance for fillies and mares. It's an optional claimer, $80,000. That optional tag, N2X, is the allowance condition. And Craig, despite the large field, I think we're going to have a strong favorite that a lot of people end up leaning on here, and that's the number 12, Tarabi, who's drawn in that far outside post position. And I get it. I mean, this horse has never run a bad race. She's kept really good company, just always shows up. She's had to deal with some layoffs in her career, and she's coming off yet another one here, but she seems to keep coming back in strong form, so she's not the kind of favorite that I want to be way against, even though there are other interesting horses in this race I want to talk about. Kind of like with an Italian, I can't take a big stand against this one.
Oh, I'm with you. Cherie DeVoe does very well with these kind of horses. She has good layoff stats. I forgot to write them down, but I think she won with 30% when I looked up similar layoffs for her. So that's not a question. She runs good speed figures. So I'm with you in here. She's one that I can't see leaving off the ticket. There's no reason to think she's not going to run a good race. The 12 post doesn't bother me at 6.5 furlongs. I actually think it's kind of a positive She can see what's happening in front of her. It's a race we show as one with a fast pace. She has tactical speed. I think it might be a little more troublesome if she was drawn inside. So she's one that will be on my tickets. No knocks at all. We'll just talk about a few. I'll start with one other horse. I'm curious to hear who your interesting horses are. I'll talk about a horse I'm negative on, and that's a horse who I think is the third choice on the morning line for Wesley Ward, Top Gun Girl. She's a horse who won a nice race, good speed figure last time at Churchill. My problem with it is it was just at 5 furlongs. It was frankly not a very good race. All the horses who have come back out of it have run pretty terribly, the four that finished behind her. The only one who's run okay is the horse who basically lost the race at the start that day, was the horse who probably would have challenged Top Gun Girl for the lead, wasn't able to do so, and just made that race basically a procession. So I just think she's going to have a really inflated opinion among some bettors because of that last running line, and I just think it's phony.
Yeah, we are in agreement about her. I don't have a whole lot to add. You basically summed up all the points I wanted to make about her. So yeah, I also think she's facing a difficult task here. I'm not as against the other horse that's a short price on the morning line, or I should say, the second choice, a shortish price, and that's the number 3 Radio Days, going out for Shug McGahee. Her last race, I don't know if she was going to win it, but Irad Ortiz just sort of rode her into some traffic at the quarter pole, and she did lose some significant momentum at what I thought was a critical point in the race. Again, I don't know if she was going to beat the winner, Diamond Wow, but I think she would have been right there with that foe if she had gotten through at the quarter pole. She still has never run quite as fast as Tarabi, but if this pace heats up, she feels like one that's going to be running late, so I wouldn't say that I'm that excited about getting value on her, but she's another one that I could see doing well here.
Yeah, I have no problem with her. I'll throw out a long shot that I will probably use on the tickets, and that is the 4 horse Ironic Twist. She was a horse that started her career with 2 nice wins, speed figures north of 100 from TimeformUS, winning at Santa Anita. She came back in February in an allowance race. Didn't run all that great. She had a tough start, kind of rushed up. It was a slow pace, so it shouldn't have took too much out of her. But it was just a race I don't think she was fully cranked for. Mark Glad has good starts, second off a similar layoff like this. So if I was going to toss in a price that's a big price, a horse that's going to be a big price, it would be the 4 Ironic Twist.
I've got some others that I want to talk about. And Craig, a horse that I want to get your take on here is the number 6 Current Climate, who's 20-1 on the morning line. And I'll be honest, I have no idea how they're going to bet this horse. She looks like more than a 20-1 shot right up until her last race, when she raced first off the claim for New Connections, Eric Foster, the trainer. And it's like she just suddenly turned into a completely different horse. I mean, it's not as if she's some synthetic specialist, because she had run over the Turfway to Pete, of course, twice prior to that in her previous 2 starts and looked fairly ordinary, arguably looked better on the dirt. But all of a sudden last time, despite going off at 12-1 in a pretty competitive allowance race, she showed speed that we had never seen from her before, opened up under minimal urging around the far turn, and Gerardo Corrales, through the stretch, was just basically standing up in the irons, looking around him for competition, and there was none, as she was doing it all on her own power. She got a 1:16 TimeformUS speed figure for that. Again, I have no idea where it came from, but I'll tell you this, if she runs that race again here on the dirt, even Tarabi is going to be running for second.
Yeah, this is a case where I would say let price be your guide. I don't think there's a decision you have to make on this horse. I think you have to use her. Just everything you said about that last race. If she's 7-2, maybe you give it a different look and come at it from a different perspective. But these are the kind of horses you want to have on your ticket. Horses who have a chance if they show up, and if you think they have a reason they could win the race. And she's going to be a big price. There's just too many other good horses in here from good connections that to think she's going to get that down way off of that 20-1. Apparently, my dog Mason, he shook his head no at me. So Mason fans don't use this horse, but yeah, I think these are the kind of horses you have to use in this kind of sequence.
Yeah, and I probably don't think she's going to be 20-1. She just ran too well last time for her to get that ignored. But, what is the fair price on her? She's got that race showing just a month ago that would beat this field. So Is 6 to 1 a fair price? Maybe a little higher than that. I don't know, but I mean, I feel like she could meet that threshold. So she's definitely a horse that I want to use in this race. And like I said, she's got prior dirt races that actually give her a shot. She's better on the dirt, and she ran that race on synth last time. So I don't know what to expect, but she's a horse that I definitely want to use. And another horse that I want to throw into the mix is a horse that's coming out of that exact same race at Turfway, that optional claimer that was won in such dominant fashion by Current Climate, and that's the number 9, My Kentucky Girl. She didn't break well that day, found herself at the back of the pack early, but she did quite a bit of running in the stretch to get up for third, obviously distantly beaten by Current Climate, but I thought it was at least a step in the right direction because she had kind of gone a little sour at the end of last year, but there was a time towards the beginning of My Kentucky Girl's career when she was running some very nice races on the dirt, including when she made a surface switch at Keeneland last October, and she won a race over a similar distance by 5 lengths, earning a 1:13 TimeformUS speed figure. I mean, that's a race that would arguably put her in the winner's circle here if she could get back to it. So she's one that's not going to be hindered by a fast pace up front. She wants to be closing at the end. So she's a horse that I think could be a similar price to the 6, and I think she's got a chance to turn the tables on that one and potentially beat a lot of others.
And just one note on that race. I mean, I looked at the chart. Not a lot of horses have run back. Most of I think it's 4 of them were more towards the back of the pack, but the speed figures held up. A couple of them have actually improved their number from that day while finishing in similar positions. So not like they went on to win races, but it just seems like there was a really big race. My Kentucky Girl obviously had an excuse, was flying at the end, and has that back race at Keeneland. So it is one where there are some prices you can use in here. It's a race that ends a sequence that I just think makes it a very difficult sequence because I don't think it's one you can dismiss the favorites, but or the favorite at least, and maybe the top 2, and it's one that there's still a lot of directions you can go, and I think that's kind of the theme of this pick 5, just really difficult sequence.
Yeah, as we've talked about it more, Craig, I think I've settled upon a way that I would attack this sequence. So I'll go first this week as we do our recap and just kind of talk through it. In this first leg, I'm going to try to avoid Barber Road. Not that I don't think Barber Road could win this race. I just don't really see the value there. And I want to use 3 horses, Principe Doro, Husband Material, who we talked about at a price, and the number 7, Tepeyu. And if one of those 3 loses, then so be it. But I feel like those are the horses that are going to be sufficient prices for me in the race. And I'll just move on and hope that, one of the others that could take money for reasons that I don't really want to support him for does not come through. In the 8th race, this is, I think, a make or break race in the sequence, the Giants Causeway, because I think the temptation here is to spread, and if you can kind of narrow down the horses that you're using and not spread in this race, I think it might give you some added coverage in later races like that final race that Craig said, he'd be struggling with to put together a ticket. And I'm going to just narrow it down to 2 horses in this Giants Causeway. Little Jewel, the number 11, and the number 4, Ouvre. I suppose a horse that would be on the bubble for use is Star Divine. I'm a little bit turned off by the post. I'm not so sure we're going to get that 6-1, so that's why I'm kind of on the fence about her. But I really do like Little Jewel and Ouvre, and there are a lot of horses in this race that I don't like, so I'm not going to spread and use a lot of horses that I'm not that thrilled with. Moving on to the Lexington, I would lean mostly on the Brad Cox runners. I'd probably press Demolition Duke a little more because I think he's going to be the better value in the race. But First Mission, I mean, he really is the horse to beat in here. I'm not against him by any means. And, Disarm would be a little more of a backup, but I'd be primarily focusing on those 3. In the Jenny Wiley, I think we kind of talked about strategy here already. In Italians, the A, I would use Queen Goddess as a backup. And I would be somewhat surprised if anybody else won this race. I'm a little bit against With the Moonlight from a value standpoint, and White Frost is the kind of horse that maybe I could convince myself to use as a C in this sequence, but I don't want to have too much of my play going through her because I do recognize this is a tough assignment. And given the fact that I was able to thin things out a little bit earlier, I'm going to allow myself to use some more horses in this last leg. Obviously, Tarabi's on my ticket. I mean, she's the one to beat. The same goes for Radio Days. She's probably more of a B or C type, but I'll use her. But I want to upgrade horses that I think are going to offer value in this race, like the number 6 Current Climate, like the number 9 My Kentucky Girl, and hopefully that, I get to this leg and I'm alive with some opinions that have already come through for me. So I'm not going to mind too much if Tarabi wins, but I also want to have tickets alive to these horses that are bigger prices that'll really make this sequence pay.
Yeah, I don't think we're all that different. The more we talked about it, I think this is a sequence I'll probably play. I'm not going to go crazy on it. We're very similar in the first race. I like Principe Dioro quite a bit, actually. He would be my A. I would use Husband Material and Tapu, maybe Barber Road if I could afford it. In the eighth race, I did want to bring up something because it's been nagging at me a little bit. You brought up the Phil D'Amato stat, and I just had these memories of him winning at Keeneland. So I pulled up his stats at Keeneland. He's actually 5 for 21 with a 3.14 ROI there. So I am going to use Amy C. He's won with horses shipping into California. Maybe he just points to Keeneland. Not sure what it is, but I would use Amy C along with my 9-horse Miners Game, who would still be my top pick. I would use the 2 that you mentioned, and probably that'd be about it. I'm just not interested in the favorites in here, either Wesley Ward horse. I'm going to leave out Star Divine while acknowledging she may very well be the best horse. I just think it's not a sequence I want to spend a ton of money on, so I'm going to go with the price horses. In that Lexington, I'm with you. I'm just going to use the 2 Brad Cox horses. That's it. I'll probably use them in equal strength just because of the value. I think First Mission's the most likely winner, but I think Demolition Duke's going to offer a lot more value. So for me, those 2 kind of cancel each other out. In race 10, same thing. In Italian and Queen Goddess for me. Not really interested in anybody else on the win end. And in that last race, I'm going to let myself spread a little bit because basically I haven't went too deep in any of these legs. I'll use the favorite Tarabi. I will not use Top Gun Girl, the Wesley Ward horse, and I'll probably use all the horses that we mentioned. Radio Days, Ironic Twist, Current Climate for sure, and even My Kentucky Girl. So I think it's a manageable sequence if you're not afraid to just toss some horses that you know full well could win the race.
Yeah, and Craig, you brought up Phil D'Amato. Actually, he's 2 for 2 so far at the current Keeneland meet. So I think that's a big part of the stat you just mentioned. And maybe he's brought some very live horses this year. So I think you do want to pay attention to those trainers that are coming into the current meet with some intention. So maybe that's the case with him. I think that was a good clarification on your part.
Yeah, I use Turf, and those 2 aren't even showing up yet in the winners that I have for whatever reason. I don't know how quickly they update Formulator, but yeah,
they were dirt races, so that's why.
Oh, yeah, that's why. I have it just set for Turf. I should have qualified. That makes more sense. But yeah, it was just something that was nagging me because I seem to remember him winning some big races the last couple years, and I see Bowie's Hero and Balnikov, Say the Word. They all won graded stakes, but he also won some allowance races with horses at good prices as well.
Well, everybody, that covers the Pick 5 sequence at Keeneland on Saturday. Hopefully we gave out some good opinions on this podcast that'll help you cash a ticket. Everybody will be recapping these races, of course, including that Lexington, and talking about the Kentucky Derby picture when we return for the TimeformUS Pacecast next week. Craig, I know that's going to be the last Pacecast for you for about a week after that as you're going on a bit of a vacation, but we'll talk about that a little bit more next week. And a lot to look forward to this weekend, the racing at Keeneland. There's some nice cards at Aqueduct and Santa Anita, so definitely looking forward to the weekend action, and we'll do our usual recap when we come back for that Pacecast next week. Everybody, remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and I do want to specifically mention YouTube. If you have not subscribed to the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel, you definitely should. We're very happy at DRF this week that we just passed 20,000 subscribers, and if you're not yet among those that have joined the party, definitely go on and subscribe on your YouTube account. So everybody, thanks for tuning in to the forecast this week, and make sure to catch next week's TimeformUS Pacecast when we come back to recap.